Welcome to My Psychedelic Roots, a podcast of conversations with people from a broad swath of lived experience to explore their psychedelic beginnings or roots, what led them to start using psychedelics, what those early experiences were like, and how those roots have impacted their life's unfolding. My name is Amy Bartlett, and it is my hope that these stories, generously shared by my guests, offer perspective and insight into the lived reality of psychedelic experiencing, both the shadow and the light. So whoever, wherever, or whenever you are, and whether you're well-traveled in this realm or just beginning to explore, welcome. I'm glad you're here. In this episode, I'm in conversation with my friend Kellen Saxberg. Kellen is a self-proclaimed queer history nerd and psychedelic enthusiast, and they've been a research assistant for Dr. Monica Williams' lab out of the University of Ottawa for 4 years, where they participated and published on a variety of topics, including psychedelics, minority stress, OCD, and queerness. And so we are all excited that Kellen is also soon to be a brand new PhD student, starting at Roosevelt University in Chicago in the fall, where they will be continuing their research into the intersection of queerness, psychedelics, and healing. And Kellen is always striving to bring the unique utility of psychedelics into therapeutic spaces, particularly for queer and marginalized folks. I know Kellen as a brilliant mind, a thoughtful and generous collaborator, a fun-loving diva, and someone who lives life with their entire mind, body, and spirit. However, this way of being has not always been accessible to them. So this introduction also serves as a reminder that this episode comes with a content warning about discussions of suicidality and suicide attempts. This warning is meant to empower you with the knowledge you need to make healthy decisions about how and if you should consume this podcast content. I invite you to practice self-care and do what feels right for you. And if you need support, please connect with someone who can help, family or friends, connecting with professionals, or calling a crisis line. There are both Canadian and international recommendations in the show notes. You are not alone, not in your pain, nor in your healing. In our conversation together, Kellen and I talk about navigating conservatism and queerness in their youth, their experiences of losing a sense of self, experiencing awe and cultivating trust, and eventually moving towards finding their way back home, both literally and figuratively, in their first psychedelic experience. This was a touching and intimate conversation, and it was an honor to learn more about the darkness and the light that Kellen has already experienced in their life. And so let's hear more about Kellen's psychedelic roots. Great to have you here today, Kellen. Welcome.
Hi, it's awesome to be here. I'm super excited.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, to kick things off, I'd love to welcome you to introduce yourself a little bit, sharing anything that you feel is important for people to know or that you want to highlight as part of moving into your psychedelic roots story together.
Totally. Yeah. I guess if I were to think of how I describe myself, I'd say I'm a community-driven person. I connect with people very deeply, and that's kind of my driving force throughout, my career and my passions and my other various interests, as you'll find out as I go into my history. But yeah, I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, very kind of conservative family, although half of my family is very conservative. The other half is like very gay, which is lovely. Grew up playing kind of hockey and went to a Catholic school. So I really got all those conservative anti-queer experiences, if you could say that. But I guess to help contextualize my experience, I had that, very gay side of my family. I had an incredible grandfather who was gay, trailblazer, truly. He was one of the first openly gay ministers of the United Church in Canada. So I had this kind of contrasting childhood where I had this society that was very conservative and then a family that was very accepting and really like activists. And so yeah, that's kind of me. I can get into more if you'd like, but yes.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting pastiche of contrasts in which to grow up. And so
Hmm.
I'm curious, as we're sort of tracing a thread from your childhood to your first psychedelic experience, how would you describe your way of seeing the world or experiencing the world when you were a kid?
I think I had a pretty happy childhood. I was very athletic, very close to my family.
Mm,
We spent summers out in Ontario, and the whole family would come together and kind of party and get together and have fun. So I felt like my view in those ages at that kind of time was very positive and easygoing. As I transitioned into junior high and high school, things started to change a little bit. I was coming to terms with my sexuality. I hadn't even considered really my gender at this point, but the sexuality thing was really, really heavy for me at the time. And so as I went into my adolescence and early adolescence, I began to build more of a pessimistic view, a feeling of like disconnection from the rest of the world, like that contrasting kind of perspective or lifestyle that I had with the family and then society was really highlighted during that time. I was still heavily involved in hockey, but realizing that I was gay and that I didn't think that I could be, open in myself in that setting. I went to a
mhm,
sports school in Calgary and then later transitioned to a Catholic school. So yeah, it was this like disconnect is how I would really describe it. I felt lost. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was very anxious, and I know this now, but at the time I was really dealing with like some undiagnosed OCD, and
mhm,
which really, really impacted the way that I could connect with people. So yeah, I found I was very lost, I think is my worldview. But my early childhood
mm,
was great.
mhm.
But later into that, yeah.
Again, so many contrasts.
Mm.
I'm
This
curious, was there any place that you felt safe in that period?
It was always home. Like home was always
Mm,
my safe space. But actually, as I transitioned into high school, it became or felt less safe. It was kind of a interesting experience. It wasn't intentionally unsafe. It just there was a lot of family dynamics going on, divorce. My mom was really dealing with some stuff at the time. So was
mhm,
my dad, and was moving from house to house. So this once kind of stable, really welcoming and comforting home was kind of split into two, and I was week on, week off, and so I didn't never felt that stability that I kind of once had. And
mhm,
so, yes, the home was my comfort place and is still now, but I had a period there where I was just really lost, and part of my psychedelic journey and some of the early insights I got was around the home and that space in particular. I mean, my first trip was at my childhood home, which was really amazing actually. So, yeah.
Yeah, lots of insight there, I'm sure. I'm
Mhm.
curious, in your childhood, were psychedelics discussed or were drugs discussed? Was it, you said it was a very gay place in some ways, and so sometimes that can mean more permissiveness or more openness to different states of consciousness or different ways of engaging in the world and with ourselves. Was that something that was discussed in your household?
Yeah, like drugs were discussed, but I think it was less like we held that queer kind of value of acceptance and exploration and kind of hearing somebody out before you make a conclusion. And so while drugs were definitely not like encouraged in the household, it was it was more of like a harm reduction approach, or maybe something more common nowadays that you'd see like, well, if you are going to experiment with drugs, here's the safe way to do it. And that was really drilled into our brains as kids. So it wasn't like it was kind of like my parents accepted the reality that we were going to experiment at some point, but this is how you do it safely. please be careful of this. Please be sure of this, you know? So
Mm-hmm.
they were discussed, but there was a difficult period in my life. I think it's a good time maybe to get into more of my childhood and my
Mm-hmm.
that adolescent years with this undiagnosed OCD and my identity and the divorce and moving schools. I was really,
Struggling.
really, yeah, I was really struggling. And
Mm-hmm.
so throughout my high school, I was hospitalized in and out of hospital, intensive mental health wards. And the conversation around drugs kind of changed around then, not so much like at home with like less harm reduction, but I was just exposed to more substance use and I had more questions. And everyone goes into a mental health unit with for different reasons. I remember this is a really crazy story, but I remember one night in the mental health ward at the Foothills, there was a room that had like 6 beds in it, and then all the other rooms had 2 beds. So it was like we called it the party room because it was like, whoa, we get like 6 kids in one room. Like we're all a little haywire at the time too. And a kid went on pass, which basically means they were allowed to go visit their family or go do something, and then they would spend the night at the hospital. And they brought in a couple pills of ecstasy or MDMA,
Mm-hmm.
and I was not allowed in the party room because of my OCD, which was being heavily misdiagnosed at the time. I was isolated. I was put in my separate own room, right at the front desk where they could watch me. I would have been in the classroom, but one of my good friends actually was instead. Bless her heart. But I just remember that conversation, then kind of talking to my parents about various drug use, and I realized it wasn't all negative. Yes, the abuse was there from the people in the ward, but a lot of the times they had great positive things to say about it, like
Mm-hmm.
especially MDMA, especially more of those psychedelic-esque. Like I kind of include weed here because it was kind of one of those commonly talked about drugs. And
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, after I was released from the hospital, I kind of went into my grade 11 year with this like all this newfound drug knowledge, and my friends were
Oh.
experimenting, and so it was kind of this culmination that led to that. Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask? And if you don't feel comfortable, feel welcome to not share. But as you're sort of awakening to drug use within your peer group, I presume that you also receive medication at the hospital. And I'm curious about your relationship to your body and to your mind, even before psychedelics, with some of the psychiatric drugs that you were taking, and if that played a role in how you came to psychedelics or not.
It it had a small impact, small but present impact. I think I was switched around quite a bit to various drugs, and I know that
Mm,
when I first had my first psychedelic experience, I was actually on an SSRI at the time, and it was something that I did a ton of research into, and still maybe wasn't the safest thing to do, but it was something that I heavily considered. So in that sense, it impacted the way I use psychedelics for the next
mhm,
couple of years. But something you'll learn about me is that I'm very perfectionistic and very
mm,
like I will dig deep into something to fully understand it before I try it,
mhm,
especially when it comes to substances. And I
mhm,
think part of that comes from the fact that I was on so many different medications, had so many different diagnoses. I was on like antipsychotics for a little while. I was on like standard SSRIs. I was on, ooh, what are they called? Like TCIs. They're like a
mm,
very old antidepressant, sorry. And
mhm,
if anything, if its impact was there, it was, my hyper awareness of drug interactions and drugs themselves and how to responsibly take them. Yeah, and also, I guess it's kind of funny. I had sort of that near death. I put it in quotations because how likely was I to die is very up in the air, I feel like. But one of my suicide attempts that led me to the hospital for the second time, to a classic, took all my medication, all my SSRIs, all my sleeping medication, heavily, like lots of alcohol. And that was actually quite a big turning point for my psychedelic use, or that led me to my psychedelic use. Was I remember I was laying in this field and I was, I don't know if I was drunk, I don't know if I was high, whatever. I was just like ready. I was feeling that end of the line,
Mm-hmm.
and people had known that I basically had ran away to then go do this. And so people were looking for me, and I was getting all these calls on my phone, and I was ignoring them. And, but I had this like huge sense of euphoria, but like also paired with sadness. And it was this weird experience of like, I felt like I was going to die. I assumed I was going to die. And I had this like eye-opening experience of being like laying in the grass there and just kind of looking at the sky, being like, wow,
Mm-hmm.
this is it. And I was like upset, I was sad, but then I was relieved. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember hearing my phone ring and looking over, and it was one of the really great friends I'd met in hospital calling me. And I was just like out of it, but I remembered and had this like awe moment of where I was like, I remembered that I was going to tell this person if I was ever going to kill myself. And like that was our deal in
Mm-hmm.
unit. So I answered, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't even remember what I said. I have no idea what I said, but I ended up being rescued because of that call. So I've
Mm-hmm.
always felt very indebted to that person, but that experience of like near death, or that experience of awe in that moment, coupled with this like striking feeling that there was one person that I had beef. I don't want to say beef, but like I had something left for, like I had to tell them, was like, oh, that was my thing. That was the reason. That was the thing that stopped me in that moment, was like I had one more thing to settle. So yeah, that experience of that awe, that near death, plus this like odd feeling of like, well, there's one person that I have to do this for.
Mm-hmm.
That was really impactful, and something I deeply considered when I first tried psychedelics.
I love how you describe that, Kellen.
Thank
It's
you.
such a
Yeah.
painful place to be in, and I'm so glad that you answered your phone. And
So am I.
I really respect the awe and the grief and the accountability that you describe in that moment. And I think about how you prepare, how much respect you seem to have for the substances you take and the things you put in your body now, and engaging in these spaces. Your experience that you just described, sort of, I hear that echoed in the respect you have.
Yeah, it's a it's a deep experience. It's filled with really complicated, mixed emotions in that
Mm-hmm.
moment. Like in my opinion, no one really wants to die. They want to escape.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite quotes, don't ask me who said it. I'm sure somebody else can find it, but a book is a suicide postponed. I think it goes something like
Mm-hmm.
that. And for me, that quote encapsulates what happened in that moment in a weird way, which is, if you really want to finish a book, it sounds silly. If you really want to finish a book, that's enough sometimes to delay your suicide. And it's those little things. And it's almost like, oh, I had this person I had to talk to first. And
Mm-hmm.
how that led to me being saved, I'm still unsure to this day, but like it was enough. And following that experience, I definitely wasn't, it wasn't like a turning of the page. I was instantly better, but I had this really intriguing near death experience and this really odd sense of euphoria, and comboed with drug experimentation and abuse and weird things. And but that curiosity was enough to continue that postponement, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And my diving into psychedelics was kind of partially an expression of exploring that feeling. And then I was like struck with all of, the normal psychedelic feelings you get and those thoughts. And then you're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I have 10 more years to like dive into this before I can give up. So it's funny, but yeah, it's suicide is so complicated.
It
It's
is.
so non-linear. So yeah.
Hmm. How long after that suicide attempt and that near-death experience did you start turning your head towards the potential of trying psychedelics or using psychedelics, whether therapeutically, recreationally, or otherwise?
Yeah, it must have been maybe almost a year after. I wasn't very aware of psychedelics at the time, and I wasn't actually introduced to them until a good friend of mine was very we called him Mountain Man. He was
Mhm.
very like, in Alberta there's all the mountains. He was big hiker and everything. And so he had an experience on mushrooms at the time, and he came to me knowing kind of my personality and how much I was like at the time diving into my mind, diving into this mental health field and psychology and queerness and my identity. And so he was like, "Whoa, like I had this experience and like you should really try this. You would really like this." And so that was my introduction, but it wasn't until like yeah, around a year later that happened, interestingly.
How did you feel about them? Again, like you say, you like to research things, and also it sounds like you were feeling more deliberate about what you were putting in your body and how you were using different substances in support of trying to be yourself, understand yourself, know yourself.
Yeah.
Did they feel exciting? Did they feel nervous? Did it feel like a calling?
There was a lot of novelty there for sure.
Mm.
It's like, ooh, I was like 16, 17. It's like,
Mhm.
ooh, new drug to try. Like, there's that novelty, of course. But I think what's interesting is, yes, I was very conscious of what I was putting in my body, very conscious about drugs.
Mhm.
And so I started doing this research on psychedelics. And then I found, whoa, like the subculture, the psychedelic attitudes and beliefs and
Mhm.
their heavy ties to Buddhism and mindfulness and that, it was like I opened a can of worms by Googling like what is psilocybin, like it was,
Mhm.
like lots of Reddit, lots of psychedelic forums, lots of just people hearing people's experiences. And then I think that's really when that connection was made between this like suicide attempt and my psych and the potential of me doing psychedelics, which just
Mhm.
blew up my interest in them. I was like, I was really trying to explore my mind in different ways to reach something similar to that because I found that moment so profound.
Mm.
And then I was like, whoa, like this might be an interesting modality to do it. And my friends had tried it and it was safe and it was kind of easier to like access it. And
Mhm.
yeah, it really opened up the can of worms. I started, I remember I was like obsessed with Alan Watts for a while. I was obsessed
Mhm.
with Terence McKenna, like some of
Mhm.
those really big figures. I mean, Alan Watts isn't technically psychedelic related, but he's very like Buddhism and mindfulness and whatnot. And he is very if you've never heard him before, he's such a compelling like way he speaks and lectures and the way he talks about things. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's kind of how that happened.
I'm curious, as we move in to talk about some of your first psychedelic experiences, just out of curiosity, the link that you were seeking between that experience of awe and what you thought psychedelics could connect you to. Was it connecting to that part of you that wanted to die? Was it connecting to the part of you that wanted to live? Was it understanding and re-experiencing the awe, or none of those
Yeah.
things? I'm just, because there's
Yeah.
obviously an energy behind that, you know?
Yeah, totally. And there's two things I think. One was this stumbling upon it. The attitude that I had coming out of that suicide attempt was truly, and this is very funny, but like I thought of it as like the Mario mushroom, a one up, you know, and
Yeah,
which
yes.
is hilarious because of course that's the Amanita muscaria mushroom.
Yeah, nice
Um,
reference.
but I hadn't made that connection at the time. But I was like, this is if I'm gonna live
Mm-hmm.
and continue forward and save myself in this moment or get saved in this moment, it's cards on the table from here on out. It's, there's nothing to lose. That was like, I think, the profound piece of knowledge or attitude or philosophy, whatever you want to call it, that I found in that moment.
Gotcha.
So I remember even like when I went into hospital for that second time, I was like, for a little bit, I was like, yeah, I'm good. Like, let me out. Like, I'm ready. Like, I feel happy. Like, I'm good, whatever. And their responses were very unclinical and traumatic. But I kind of still maintain that philosophy. But as mood and brains work, I left the hospital and kind of fell back into the rut. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the first kind of thing there is like I was trying to re-experience that profound moment where I felt so motivated, so encouraged to like just give up all my anxieties and just go for it and like try new things, and in more of like a sustained way that I had more awareness of. And through my research of psychedelics, I felt like there's a possibility there. Like people talk about ego
Mm,
death, and I was like, whoa, like I didn't even know who I was in that moment either.
right.
Like, and so like there was that potential there. And then just that serendipitous kind of Mario mushroom, amanita muscaria, which is psychedelic in a way. And, so
Mm-hmm.
those two things I think really was the link, or at
Yeah.
least I like to think so.
I love how you describe that. It's such a life force
Mm,
energy of life, you
yeah,
know?
it's
This,
truly push you in the deep end.
yeah. I wonder, thinking back to your childhood and all the tensions and all the in-betweenness
Hmm.
takes you above that and moves past and through and out of that complexity, maybe, that you
Yeah.
grew up with.
Ooh, like, can you hear my research yet? Like it's yeah, that feeling of being above, looking like that eagle view kind of on your life, and the objective point of view
Mm-hmm.
is really, really profound and compelling, especially when you're considering suicide, because you can
Mm-hmm.
suddenly see how you're not so much of a burden, or the mistakes you've made, or the goodness you bring, and it's really just like it's all laid bare there. Yeah, I'm excited to get into this first trip because there's a couple big themes there
Mm-hmm.
that I really pushed and forced to work through on that first psychedelic trip.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
let's talk about it. I asked this question, you can answer it or not, but if your first psychedelic experience were a chapter in your life story, what would the title of that chapter be?
Well, being the very perfectionist, dedicated person I was, I spent a long, long time actually thinking about this when you sent me the flow, and I was, I really struggled, but I kind of landed on so cheesy, but
Mhm.
like Lost and Found,
Mhm.
such a classic,
Mhm.
I think, but I still was so disconnected from the world coming out of
Yeah.
hospital. I was
Mhm.
still had all the same issues. I was still in this conservative environment. I was still super gay
Mhm.
and didn't know what to do with that. Yeah, I think it'll be more illustrated while I describe the experience, but it's just
Yeah.
generally I felt like I had a better sense of my place
Yeah.
now, like then and
Mhm.
before, after that
Mhm.
experience or and during that experience. So
Mm.
it felt like I wasn't fully there, but I was starting to connect with the rest of the world and my place and finding myself. Yeah.
Yeah, you knew that you were looking for something,
Hmm.
perhaps. So,
Totally.
so tell us about that first experience.
Uh,
Who were you with? How did it come about? What did you take?
yeah. Okay. So I took around 3 grams of psilocybin mushrooms.
Mm.
I think they were like golden teachers, but I
Mhm.
don't fact check me on that if you
Mhm.
could. Yeah, I was probably around January. I was grade 11, so I was like
Mhm.
around I must have been 17 at the time, 16 at the time.
Mm.
And I actually had a boyfriend my first ever boyfriend. It was a very short relationship, but he was there and he had been familiar with drugs, and so I was like felt like, okay, I have this great trip sitter here. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was me and then one of my mountain man was there
Mm-hmm.
for a little bit. He wasn't there the whole time,
Mm-hmm.
but it was, yeah, January. I did my research. I was like, woke up, I had a really good night's rest, woke up in
Mm-hmm.
the morning, refreshed, took them probably around like 11 o'clock,
Mm-hmm.
maybe 10. And the experience was really interesting. I was home alone, so it was just me and my boyfriend for a long time. And I took them with like, ugh, horrible idea, with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Don't do
Mm-hmm.
that. It was like, don't recommend. The texture is awful.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, I still can't eat them just plain. They're
Mm-hmm.
too gross for me. But yeah, I was just like this really like I was dedicated. I was like I wrote in my trip journal. I was like I was really getting into it. I was felt so like professional, even though I'd never done it before.
Did you have an intention?
I had a little bit of an intention. It wasn't as clear set as I would have nowadays,
Mm-hmm.
but it was kind of just like I'm gonna try this new experience, see where it takes me, and if it takes me somewhere really dark, I'm just gonna roll with the punches. I was pretty brave at the time. Like I fight,
Yeah.
and now I'm like I laugh at it, but I felt like I'd been through the most. Like I'd been through everything, and like I'd,
You kind of had, yeah.
I think I had for a kid for sure, but I
Mm-hmm.
was not ready for the psychedelic experience. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was a little overconfident. Hence why I took like 3 grams. I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
like have a full experience.
And so, what was the come up like?
The come up was pretty usual for, the come ups that I would later experience. It's like a little bit of anxiety. I always get a little restless. I like to like
Mm-hmm.
do a walk, but I was probably just pacing around my kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, very high energy, like can't stop moving kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it lasted around, usually lasts around like 15 to 30 minutes, but I don't fully recall coming up. But I do
Mm-hmm.
remember the first time I was like, whoa, what is happening here? I was in our house, my childhood home. There's 2 stories, or there's a basement and then 2 stories.
Mm-hmm.
And on your way up to the second floor, there's kind of like you take the one set of stairs and there's the little tiny landing that's usual for like stairs. And if you continue straight, there's another set of stairs to what we would call a bonus room.
Mm-hmm.
So if you double back, you go back upstairs. But if you go forward, you go to the bonus room. And it was one of my favorite rooms in the house. Like as a kid, that's where I played. That's where I made my forts. That's where me and my brother used to have these huge battles with little like action figures, and they were wars that would last like days. And it would like irritate my mom to no end because she also loved that room, but there would just be toys scattered everywhere, and we'd be like, "No, you can't move them because like we're in the middle of a battle." Anyways, it was so comfy in there, and there's like a skylight, and so I started in there, and I was just kind of watching some TV. I think I was probably watching like National Geographic or something. And I remember reaching over my boyfriend and kind of like hugging him and being like, "Where did my arm go? Where's my arm? Like what?" And I felt like I just fully lost my arm to this weird abyss, and it freaked me out a little bit because I was like, "Whoa, I've never felt that before. Like, ooh, what's going on here?" And then I took that step back. And I don't know if you've experienced this before, but like when you realize you're tripping, sometimes it's almost like a wave. You're like,
Yeah.
whoa, okay, there's the visuals,
Mm-hmm.
there's the whatever. And so kind of had that experience and then was like, whoa, okay,
Mm-hmm.
like very euphoric, very energetic, super happy. I was like, let's get into it. Like let's explore. Let's walk
Mm-hmm.
around the house and just look at all the different textures and really appreciate the design. My mom is just an unbelievable designer, interior designer. We always said that she should have a career in it, but she just created this beautiful home. Yeah, I think that was, I don't remember exact details, but that was the biggest takeaway almost from that experience, or one of them that I first recognized was the glow of the house. It was
Mm.
there were a lot of browns and deep reds and stone and stuff in the house. And so when you're tripping, it kind of bleeds into the air almost. And it felt like I was sitting on like in the middle of winter in a log cabin with the fireplace going, with that warmth and that
Mm.
ambiance. And I remember sitting on my kitchen floor and just looking around and feeling the floor and just being like, whoa,
Mhm.
whoa. Like this is that safe place that I knew as a kid. Like I almost like felt like I was experiencing it as a child again with that security, that safety, that comfort, that warmness. And yeah, I just sat there and I just was like taking in that feeling that I felt I hadn't had for a long time.
Mm.
And then with that came this like amazing respect for my mom.
Yeah.
And, I was very admittedly pretty pessimistic towards my mom and kind of an asshole during that time. And I felt like she wasn't supporting me in ways, but in that moment, I was like, wow, like she, she's going through it too. I know that. But
Mhm.
yet I'm still sitting in this beautiful home that she has built for us that has always been safe
Mm.
and or at least she's always done her absolute best to make it safe. And I remember going down to the basement. My mom was she was a brilliant musician. She, went to the University of Manitoba for singing and piano. She was truly like a child prodigy of piano. So I would grow up and she would play piano and teach us piano. And I remember it was carpeted down there at the time. And I was just like laying on the carpet, looking at this piano and just having this deep respect for her and her role and her just the motherhood and just the love. I don't know. It was just a really beautiful feeling of connection that I found.
That's so beautiful, Kellen. I I wonder, connecting back to those early childhood experiences of feeling connected and in family and home and safe.
Yeah, it was. I was lost and then I was found. I found that security. I found
Yeah.
that love again that I
Yeah.
had been so disconnected from. And I remember thinking in that moment, like, it doesn't really matter all that much the outside world. Like, I mean, it does. It obviously impacts us, in that moment, it didn't feel like that harmful, stigmatizing, awful place that I had to like consistently live in
Mhm.
could permeate the house. Like, it just felt like, I always had that contrast between home and outside, and I really, really felt that contrast, and then found the deep respect for it at the same time and just like was in utter awe and amazement at and impressed with just how my family had built this safe haven that I had been
Mhm.
kind of taking advantage of for a little bit or that had felt disconnected from. And so that was pretty big for me. Like that was yeah,
Again, we can cut this out, or I don't know, I don't wanna put words in your mouth,
no
but
worries.
I'm curious. I was almost a little bit teary listening to you talk about just the warmth, and just I could feel it, and, like, belonging in a place. Being safe, but also, like, I'm I'm supposed to be here. I'm allowed to be here. It's
Exactly.
okay to be here. This is my place to be, you know?
Exactly. That's exactly what it felt like. It was I could be who I wanted to be. I could have whatever sexual identity I wanted to have, gender identity. I could be interested in what I wanted to be interested in. My mom was
Mm.
always the greatest and still is my greatest champion when it
Mm.
comes to, just everything, like my passions. We were always at odds with my outside world and some of like activities I was involved in. Like I always would open up to her and tell her like, "Oh, I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to play hockey. I didn't want to do these things." Felt like I didn't fit in and whatnot. And she was always championing me to try the things that I wanted to. Like I was such a science nerd, and she would always buy me those little science kits, and she would take me to little things, and she took me to my first gay support group, and she was like, she was the one that was championing me in that moment and my entire life and still is. And so I just, yeah, it was feeling that gratitude, that awe,
Mm-hmm.
the true courage and patience it took for her to do that, in spite of all of the outside forces, in spite of
Mm-hmm.
how unsafe I was being, how, misbehaving I was being. You have to understand that. Like I was pretty sexually at the time, like I was really risky. It was a combination of me trying to find my identity while
Mm-hmm.
coping, while finding myself. Like I just, it was
Yeah.
really unsafe. And I was very like sexualized, I guess, in that way. And like it was, yeah. My point there is that my like the stuff that doctors told my parents, I can't believe that they overcame that. Like I can't believe that they
Mm-hmm.
just like, and especially my mom, continued to trust me, continued to champion me, continued to fight for me. I remember this is kind of traumatic, and if it's too much for the podcast, we can cut it out. But like I was diagnosed at 15. Well, not formally diagnosed, but I vividly remember sitting in that room, in that little interview room with my parents and the psychiatrist, and them giving them a sheet saying antisocial personality disorder. Like, we think your
Mm-hmm.
son has this.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, if you knew me for 10 minutes, you'd know. And I was 15. Like
Yeah.
you can't even think about diagnosing somebody until they're 18. Like your personality is informed. And part of that was because I was sexually deviant, in air quotations I'm putting out right now, but like because I was hooking up with men online, and I was lying about it, and I was
Mm-hmm.
trying to contextualize my OCD symptoms through various things,
Mm-hmm.
and I was lying and whatnot. And so it just like my mom trusted me with my word and fought for me. So it's just that that deep gratitude. I never had to challenge her for her to trust what I was saying,
Yeah.
even though the doctors were like, here's a personality disorder that is characterized by deceit and and lies and impulsivity, and yeah,
Yeah. It sounds like you're very loved.
I am. I'm very, very loved.
And I'm
And
so
yeah,
grateful to hear about your first experience and that you got to experience how loved and safe and warm
it
the world
was
is and you are.
yeah, it was a turning point for sure.
Mm.
It was what got me interested in queerness and psychedelics and the science. I immediately saw the utility. I immediately saw the benefits to myself. Like I found value in that moment through somebody else. And
Mhm.
it took me like a very deep psychedelic experience to see that at the time.
Mhm. How did that experience compare with what you expected going into it?
Oh, it was like, I mean, in a way, I was searching for that profound moment. So yes, I was a little bit aware.
Mm.
Did I have any idea of the feelings? No. I don't think
Mhm.
I feel like you could describe psychedelics to somebody at length and they would still be shocked at the
Mhm.
experience, I think. I had that knowledge and assumed something might happen, but not the content, not like it was. Like I was really
Mhm.
thinking I was gonna deep dive into being gay, or deep
Mhm.
dive into mental illness and trauma and stuff. And in a way I did, but just through this really wonderful and compelling way. And that
Mhm.
was so unexpected. I remember I was outside during that same trip. And so it's kind of like December, January. It wasn't overly cold, but there was still snow on the ground. And I remember going up onto this hill with all the snow and I pick up this handful of snow. I have all the visuals and I'm seeing every individual snowflake in my hand.
Mm.
And I must have been staring, I don't know how long I was staring at it, but I remember kind of cluing back in and it being a puddle in my hand and being like, no, like I just killed a whole society of snowflakes. Like, no, like I was so distraught. But then, but it like, and it was such a funny experience and such a good break from all the deepness.
Mm.
And I was just like, I was bawling my eyes out. And I remember like I looked up and I was on top of this hill and boom,
Mhm.
incredible sunset, blue sky, like orange and purples. And I was just like, what is going on? Like, what, like, how do I even comprehend what's going on right now? Like, the beauty, the meaning. Like, I just bawled my eyes out because I thought these snowflakes were alive and, like, in a little society and civilization in my hands. Like, if I'm crying and having this compelling experience about these snowflakes, what does that say about my own experience? And then I look up and see
Mm.
this beauty, and it's just like, whoa, okay. I have officially touched grass. You know, I don't know.
Or touch snow.
Yeah, touch snow. Very dead grass and snow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Such perspective. How is the come down? How is it to come back to earth after those deep, several experiences of awe, it sounds like?
hmm It was overwhelming, a little overwhelming, but it was graceful.
Mhm.
I was lucky enough to have my friend there and who was there during the later parts of my trips, and we just kind of sat on the floor and had some tea and chatted about it, and we're just kind of going back and forth about how incredible these substances are. And
Mhm.
yeah, I almost got like a really good natural debrief. So I didn't leave being in a state of kind of like confusion or like panic or anything. It felt natural. It felt good. And I think that's pretty lucky that having an overwhelming deep experience like that can really sometimes throw you when you come back. But I felt like it was pretty good and pretty natural and really ignited I was like immediately after I was like, I want to do them again, but I don't want to do them for like 6 months.
Yeah.
It's like I have enough to ponder on this one trip, but I have to do them again. And I want to be outside this time. I want to be warm and yeah. So
Mhm. What's the one thing you wish you had known before that first experience? Or
mm,
perhaps a piece of advice that you might give someone based on your experience?
yeah. It's a difficult question. I think the advice, I think I wouldn't maybe tell myself anything else before. I felt like I was overly prepared, if anything. Um, but the advice I'd give is just you never know. Like, first of all, very standard advice of set and setting. The
Yes.
people you're with will make or break your trip, especially for your first time when you're so
Mhm.
vulnerable. But also just I feel like if you surround yourself, you never know what you're gonna get with a psychedelic trip. And so like you can set a dedicated intention. That has worked for me sometimes. Sometimes I've completely departed from that. But if I find that if I surround myself with things that I enjoy or creative outlets or have like some sort of idea of what I might want to do on my trip, it's really hard to have like a bad trip in that way. And the actually best advice that my ex-boyfriend gave me during that
Mhm.
experience was if you're freaking out, move. Like
Mm.
change rooms. Every on all of my psychedelic trips, every room has felt different. Maybe not completely different, but different
Mhm.
enough to get you out of that scary spot.
Mhm.
And the first thing I did when I was freaking out with losing my arm was I went downstairs and into this warm, cozy environment that was immediately reassuring and calming. So yeah,
Mm.
that'd be my advice. Get up and move. Or get somebody to carry you if you can. Change the music, you know?
That's a good piece of advice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Kellen, it's been such a pleasure speaking to you, hearing your story. Thank you so much for sharing yourself, sharing your pain, and sharing your joy. What a roller coaster in so
Yeah,
much of what you've experienced already in life.
yeah. Thank you so much for having me on here and allowing me to share this story. It's very important to me, and I hope
Mhm.
somebody can take something out of it.
Mhm.
And yeah, just know that you're on that edge, you're ready to give up, reach out. If you can't reach out, reach for a book, you know, in that metaphorical sense. Play video
Yeah.
games, finish a game, whatever it
Mhm.
is.
Mhm. Thank you, Kellen.
Thank you.
Feel very grateful to know a little bit about your book and your story.
Yeah, lots of stories to share.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
thank you.